I watched as the man who destroyed my best friend's memorial garden and stole her life savings signed a document he thought was a massive payday. He didn't realize he was actually signing a master material lease that made him personally responsible for 20 years of other contractors' shoddy work. He thought he was untouchable. I decided to drown him in every single nail, brick, and broken pipe he'd ever touched. Hey everyone, my name is Elias Thorne, 76 years old, and if you like seeing scammers get what they deserve, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. For 35 years, I was a construction auditor. Most people think auditors just count money. I counted every nail, every beam, and every permit. My job was to find the missing pieces in a construction project, the shortcuts, the shoddy materials, the places where contractors tried to cut corners and line their pockets. I know that in construction, every single piece of material, every worker, and every handshake is tied to a mountain of paperwork. And if you understand that paperwork, you can build a perfect trap. The nightmare began with my best friend, Eleanor. Eleanor is 78, a kind, gentle soul who had just lost her husband of 50 years, Thomas. Thomas had always loved gardening, so Eleanor wanted to create a small, beautiful memorial garden in their backyard, a place of peace. She hired a contractor named Victor Stone. Victor was all charm and smiles. He promised Eleanor a sanctuary, a place where she could remember Thomas every day. He took her entire life savings, $80,000 as a deposit. Victor's crew showed up and in one day turned Eleanor's beautiful backyard into a war zone. They tore out her patio, dug a massive gaping hole where the garden was supposed to be, and left piles of debris everywhere. Then they vanished. No calls, no texts, no sign of Victor. Eleanor was left with a massive, dangerous pit in her backyard and a stop work order from the city because Victor had never pulled the proper permits. It was a disaster, a constant reminder of her grief, and it was unsafe. I called Victor's office, but the number was disconnected. I drove to the address on his contract, a vacant lot. He was a ghost. To make matters worse, a week later, Eleanor received a lawsuit. Victor Stone was suing her for breach of contract, claiming she had prevented him from completing the work by not paying his final invoice, which he never sent. He was trying to sue a grieving widow for money he'd already stolen. He thought he was untouchable because he vanished with the cash. He didn't realize that in my world, a missing contractor leaves a very messy paper trail, and I was about to follow that trail right to his front door. I knew Victor Stone wasn't just a bad contractor, he was a professional scammer. His lawsuit against Eleanor wasn't just harassment, it was a tactic. He wanted to intimidate her into giving up so he could disappear with her $80,000, but he picked the wrong grieving widow to mess with. I still had access to the State Contractors Board database from my auditing days. I started digging into Victor Stone Construction. The first red flag, Victor Stone Construction wasn't a real company. It was a shell. The contractor's license number he gave Eleanor belonged to an entirely different, legitimate company that had gone out of business 5 years ago. Victor was operating under a stolen license. This meant he had no insurance, no bonds, and no legal standing. Every contract he signed was invalid, but proving that in court would be slow. I needed to move fast before he completely drained Eleanor's remaining emergency funds. I ran a reverse search on the company's registration. I found an old P.O. box associated with the defunct company. I paid a visit to the P.O. Box rental agency. I pretended to be a former associate of Victor Stone, claiming I needed to verify tax documents. The clerk, not wanting to deal with the IRS, gave me an old change of address form. It led to a small apartment complex across town. I parked outside the apartment building for 2 days, watching. Finally, I saw him, Victor Stone. He wasn't the bankrupt contractor he claimed to be. He was driving a new brand luxury SUV, wearing designer clothes and laughing on his phone. He was clearly living a very comfortable life on Eleanor's dime. He walked into the building and I followed him. I found his apartment number. I didn't knock. Instead, I left a plain white envelope under his door. Inside was a single page, a copy of a notice of pending audit from the Department of Consumer Affairs with his stolen license number circled in red. I knew he wouldn't panic over an audit notice. He was too arrogant for that. But he would start looking for a way to prove his legitimacy. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted him to think he needed a new contract, a new supply deal, anything to make his shell company look real, because I was about to offer him one, and it was going to be the contract that sealed his fate. Victor Stone didn't take the bait immediately. He was careful for a scammer, but I knew his type, arrogant and greed. He saw the audit notice as an annoyance, not a threat. He thought he could outrun any government paperwork. He didn't realize that I was about to weaponize the very thing he needed most, building materials. I created a fake company called Global Aggregate Supply, a phantom distributor for construction materials. Using my old contacts in the construction industry, I drafted a contract for a master material lease. This document looked like a dream come true for a cash-strapped contractor like Victor. It offered bulk discounts on lumber, concrete, and steel, everything he needed to restart his scam business. The catch was hidden deep within the legal jargon. By signing the master material lease, Victor's company would assume joint and several liability for any structural defects or material failures of all projects historically supplied by Global Aggregate Supply. I knew Global Aggregate Supply had never existed, so it had never supplied any real projects. But I also knew Victor was using a stolen license, and that license was tied to a dozen failed or shoddy projects from the legitimate company that went out of business 5 years ago. My trap was simple. I was going to make Victor responsible for every single piece of bad work done by the company whose license he was using. He wouldn't just pay for Eleanor's garden. He would pay for every broken pipe, every leaky roof, and every collapsing foundation tied to that old license. I sent the master material lease to Victor's apartment through a fake courier service. I included a cover letter explaining that due to new city regulations, all contractors needed to certify their material supply chain or risk immediate suspension. I knew he wouldn't want his stolen license suspended. A few days later, Victor called the number on the letterhead, a burner phone I had set up. He was arrogant, demanding to know the best deal he could get. I played the part of a gruff, no-nonsense sales manager. I told him he needed to sign the master material lease immediately to lock in current prices before the citywide material shortage hit. I could hear his greed in his voice. He thought he was about to get rich. He didn't realize he was about to sign a contract that would make him the most sued man in the state. Victor agreed to meet. He chose a busy, anonymous coffee shop downtown, thinking he was being clever by picking a public place. He arrived 10 minutes late, carrying a worn briefcase, looking more like a petty hustler than a legitimate businessman. I watched him from a distance, noting his impatience as he scanned the room. He didn't see me until I walked up to his table, a thick folder under my arm. "Mr. Stone?" I said, extending my hand. I introduced myself with a fake name, Mr. Davies, Regional Sales Manager for Global Aggregate Supply. I watched his eyes dart from my face to the folder. He saw the Global Aggregate Supply logo, and I could practically see the dollar signs flashing in his eyes. I laid the contract on the table. It was long, dense, and full of complex legal language, designed to be intimidating but ultimately unreadable to someone who only cared about the bottom line. I pointed to the signature line. "Sign here, Mr. Stone, and you lock in a 40% discount on all future material orders. This is the only way to bypass the new city regulations on material sourcing." Victor didn't read past the first few pages. He didn't see the clause on page 17 about assumption of historical material liabilities. He didn't see the small print on page 28 about joint and several responsibility for structural integrity. He saw 40% discount and bypass regulations. He picked up the pen and with a confident, arrogant flourish, he signed. He signed with his full legal name, Victor Stone. He didn't just sign for his fake company. He signed as himself, personally agreeing to the terms. "Excellent," I said, taking the signed document and slipping it into my briefcase. "Your first shipment of concrete will be available for pickup next week. Just present this signed agreement at our warehouse." I handed him a fake address to a defunct industrial park on the other side of the state. Victor leaned back, a smug smile on his face. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Davies. This is going to make me a very rich man." "Oh, I think you're going to be very busy, Mr. Stone," I replied, my voice now devoid of any pretense. "In fact, I think you're about to be the busiest man in the entire state, because that document you just signed, it doesn't give you free materials. It makes you personally liable for every single faulty foundation, every collapsed roof, and every leaky pipe that the original Victor Stone construction license ever touched. I have the audit reports, Mr. Stone, all 50 of them, and now you own every single one of them." Victor's smug smile vanished. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a sudden dawning horror. "What are you talking about? That company went out of business 5 years ago." "Exactly," I said, rising from the table. "And every single one of their former clients, the ones who lost their life savings, the ones whose houses are literally falling apart due to shoddy materials, they are about to receive a copy of that master material lease. Because according to your signature, you are now the legal successor, the joint and severally liable party for all of their structural failures. That 40% discount you signed for, it just became a $5 million bill for other people's ruined homes." Victor tried to lunge for me, but I was already walking away. He grabbed his phone and started yelling into it, but it was too late. I had already sent the master material lease to dozens of lawyers across the state, the lawyers who represented the former victims of the original Victor Stone construction. Within 24 hours, the lawsuits began to rain down on Victor. They weren't from Eleanor. They were from the families of a collapsed porch in Albany, a flooded basement in Rochester, and a crumbling foundation in Syracuse. Each lawsuit named Victor Stone personally as the liable party, citing the master material lease as proof. He didn't just have one lawsuit, he had 50. He went from being the plaintiff suing an old widow to being the defendant in a statewide legal disaster. His phone didn't stop ringing. Lawyers, news reporters, and angry former clients. His luxury SUV was surrounded by process servers. He couldn't go anywhere without being handed another subpoena. His arrogance had given way to pure panic. He was trapped in a financial avalanche of his own making. He had preyed on the vulnerable, hidden behind shell companies, and stolen an old woman's peace. Now every single one of his past sins was coming home to roost, all under his new master material lease. He thought he was untouchable. I just made him the most touchable man in the state. Victor Stone didn't just get sued, he was instantly made infamous. The news channels picked up the story of the master material lease and the construction karma. They showed his luxury SUV, his expensive apartment, and the pile of lawsuits growing on his doorstep. His phone didn't ring with calls for new jobs. It rang with calls from former victims. His lawyer, a cheap, desperate man, called me begging for a settlement. "Mr. Chorn," he pleaded, "my client is facing financial ruin. He had no idea what he was signing. He'll give Eleanor her $80,000 back, plus an extra $10,000 for her troubles. Just make the lawsuits go away." "Tell your client he signed a personal assumption of liability, not a suggestion," I said. "He's not just paying for Eleanor's garden, he's paying for every piece of shoddy work the original company ever did. And I want more than money. I want a full, notarized confession detailing every single scam he's ever pulled. If he doesn't confess to everything, I'll release the master material lease to every construction board in the country, and he'll never get a license again." Victor, facing financial annihilation and criminal charges for his stolen license, finally broke. He signed a 30-page confession. He detailed how he targeted elderly widows, how he used shell companies, how he forged documents, and how he planned to disappear with Eleanor's money. He thought he was trading a few lawsuits for his freedom. He didn't realize he was giving me the evidence to put him away for a very long time. I took the confession, notarized and signed, and immediately forwarded it to the state attorney's office. They didn't just have a civil case against Victor, they had a goldmine of admissions for criminal fraud, grand larceny, and operating without a valid license. The master material lease didn't just make him financially liable, it pressured him to confessing to years of criminal activity. He had been so focused on avoiding the civil lawsuits that he walked straight into a criminal trap. He thought he could outrun the law, but he couldn't outrun his own signature. The arrest of Victor Stone was swift and public. The state attorney's office, armed with his signed confession, moved in. He was taken from his luxury apartment in handcuffs, the same apartment he paid for with stolen money. The cameras were there, flashing as they led him away. Eleanor saw it on the evening news. She called me, her voice shaking, but this time it was with relief, not grief. "Elias, he's finally caught. It's over." "It's over, Eleanor," I confirmed, "and it's just beginning for him." With Victor in jail, the legal process shifted. The $80,000 he stole from Eleanor was recovered from his offshore accounts. I made sure every cent was returned to her. But I didn't stop there. I used the master material lease to seize his luxury SUV, his designer clothes, and even the expensive furniture in his apartment. This wasn't for Eleanor. This was for the other victims. Every piece of value he had was liquidated to pay back the other families whose lives he had destroyed. I personally oversaw Eleanor's memorial garden. I hired a team of honest contractors, all properly licensed and bonded. They worked with care and respect, transforming the gaping hole in her backyard into the beautiful, peaceful sanctuary she had envisioned for Thomas. The stop work order was officially lifted, and the permits were properly filed. When the garden was finished, Eleanor walked out, her face beaming. The rose bushes were planted, the stone path was laid, and a small, elegant bird bath sat in the center. She picked a single rose and held it to her heart. "It's beautiful, Elias. Thomas would have loved it." "He would have loved knowing that justice was served, Eleanor," I said, watching her. "He would have loved knowing that the greedy get what comes to them." Eleanor finally had her peace, and Victor Stone, he had nothing. He had lost his freedom, his money, and his reputation. He thought he could build an empire on lies, but I showed him that in construction, everything eventually falls apart if the foundation is rotten. And Victor Stone's foundation was pure rot. Victor Stone's criminal trial was a mere formality after his comprehensive confession. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for multiple counts of fraud, grand larceny, and operating under a stolen license. But for me, the real victory was in the financial annihilation. A prison sentence is temporary, but financial ruin can last a lifetime. Because of the master material lease, Victor was not just liable for the $80,000 he stole from Eleanor, he was personally on the hook for the millions in damages caused by the original Victor Stone construction projects. I worked with the victims' lawyers, using the signed lease as the bedrock of every civil lawsuit. The judgments against him mounted into the tens of millions. Every asset Victor had ever acquired, every hidden bank account, every luxury item, all of it was seized. The offshore accounts he thought were safe were frozen and repatriated. His luxury SUV was auctioned off and the money went to the victims. Even the royalties from a small book he had secretly written about becoming rich through loopholes were immediately garnished. He had tried to profit from his crimes, and I made sure every cent went to those he had harmed. The master material lease became a legendary document in the industry. It was taught in legal seminars as a cautionary tale of how one signature could undo years of criminal activity. Construction boards across the country used it to strengthen their regulations against shell companies and stolen licenses. Victor Stone didn't just lose his freedom, he became a textbook example of what happens when you try to outsmart a construction auditor. I paid a visit to Eleanor a few months after the garden was complete. She was sitting on her new patio, drinking tea, surrounded by her blooming flowers. She looked peaceful, content. We didn't talk about Victor. We talked about roses and the changing seasons. The past was truly behind her. I realized then that my work wasn't just about numbers or contracts. It was about restoring peace, rebuilding trust, and showing that even the most complex scams can be undone by someone who understands the blueprints. Victor Stone thought he was a master builder of fraud. I just showed him how to tear it all down, piece by piece, until nothing was left. 1 year has passed since Victor Stone was locked away. I still get periodic reports from the state attorney's office. They detailed the pathetic few dollars being garnished from his prison work earnings to pay down the millions in civil judgments against him. It's a symbolic payment, really, a constant reminder that he is a slave to his own greed. He'll never own anything again. Every cent he earns, every inheritance he might dream of, will be legally seized. I'm sitting in my own backyard now, looking at my modest garden. It's not a grand memorial like Eleanor's, but it's mine. I recently received a thank you card from one of the other victims, an elderly couple whose roof had collapsed due to Victor's shoddy work. They used the restitution money to fix their home and finally get some peace. It's those small victories, the quiet restoration of lives, that truly make this work worthwhile. My phone still rings sometimes, not with scammers, but with desperate victims. They've heard about Elias Dorn, the construction auditor who caught Victor Stone. They want me to help them find the missing pieces in their own shattered lives. I always tell them I'm retired, but then I find myself opening my laptop, running a few checks, making a few calls, because the truth is, once you've spent your life hunting for the flaws in the foundation, you can't just turn it off. I visited Eleanor last week. Her memorial garden is thriving. She told me she finally feels like herself again. The gaping hole Victor left in her life has been filled not just with flowers, but with a renewed sense of security. She knows her home is safe, her money is back, and the man who tried to steal her peace is paying for every single one of his lies. People like Victor Stone think they're clever. They think they've found a loophole in the system, but they forget that every loophole is just a gap in the paperwork, and someone like me, someone who spent decades staring at those gaps, knows exactly how to turn them into a trap. Victor Stone built a house of cards, and I just showed him the wind. I still keep a copy of that master material lease in my files. It's a reminder of what happens when you think you can exploit good people. It's a reminder that true justice isn't always found in a courtroom. Sometimes it's found in the fine print of a contract. And for Victor Stone, that fine print was the last receipt he'll ever see of his freedom. The master audit of Victor Stone's entire criminal enterprise took over a year. The master material lease wasn't just a document. It was a blueprint that revealed his entire network of shell companies, stolen identities, and offshore accounts. The FBI used it to dismantle a multi-state operation that had frauded hundreds of innocent people, not just with construction scams, but with fake investments and bogus insurance policies. I worked closely with the federal agents, poring over mountains of financial records. It was tedious work, but every time we uncovered a new victim, every time we identified another hidden asset, I felt the satisfying click of a puzzle piece falling into place. We recovered over $12 million in stolen funds from Victor and his associates. This wasn't just a victory for Eleanor, it was a triumph for every single person who had been told their money was lost forever. The final restitution hearing was a powerful moment. Families from all over the country, elderly couples, young families who had lost their life savings, small business owners, they all received checks. I saw tears of relief, tears of joy. It was more rewarding than any high-profile corporate audit I had ever performed, because this wasn't about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about human lives, restored dignity, and justice finally served. Victor Stone is now in a maximum security federal prison serving his full sentence. The civil judgments against him are so vast that he'll never, ever be able to earn enough money to pay them off. Every cent he might ever acquire, every meager prison wage, will be immediately garnished. He is, for all intents and purposes, financially erased. His name is a permanent black mark in every contractor database in the country. People often ask me if I regret not calling the police immediately when I found out about Victor. I tell them no. If I had simply called the police for fraud, Victor would have fled with Eleanor's money and none of the other victims would have ever seen justice. By playing the long game, by building the master material lease trap, I didn't just catch him, I destroyed his entire criminal network and recovered millions for his victims. My garden is my sanctuary now. I tend to my roses, I watch the birds, and I sometimes think about the intricate dance of contracts and permits, of greed and justice. I know the world is full of people like Victor Stone who think they can build empires on quicksand, but I also know that for every scammer, there's an auditor, a detective, or just an old friend who knows how to find the cracks in the foundation. And when those cracks appear, the whole rotten structure comes tumbling down. And that, to me, is the most beautiful audit of all.